And he said yes. He wouldn't got the shovel, he dug me out, and wasn't too careful about making sure he didn't nick me in the shins. And he was commenting most of the time while he was doing it. He didn't rub my nose in it, but he said, you know, when I was growing up in Arizona, this sort of thing happened from time to time. I was feeling bad. Oh, good, I'm glad to know I'm not the only one. He said, yeah, cows. Some of our cows would get into it. He said, usually when that happened, we'd have to shoot them because it proved to us the cow in question didn't have sense enough to stay out of the stuff. And that's all he said. And we laughed about it later. And he was a kind man, and he rescued me many times. That's an example of the kind of human being he was, the kind of father he was to me, the kind of husband he was to my mother, the kind of colleague he was, a professor and friend to many of you in this room. And so this statue that was made of him 11 years ago, a copy of it now sits in the J. Reuben Clark Law School at BYU. Some of you may have seen it. Another copy can be found at Sidley and Austin, just outside of their moot courtroom. The family also has a copy. When I used to work at Sidley, sometimes late at night, 2 or 3 in the morning when I was working on a brief, I would go down, felt like I was sinking in quicksand, asked him for some legal advice. Dad, what would you do in this circumstance? I knew he would have the answer. Unfortunately, his statue didn't answer. But my heart was touched when I saw that statue, because when I saw it, I didn't just see a man in a morning suit staring at this sea of what he may have still seen as other naked lady statues. What I saw was a father standing there with a shovel, ready to help me shovel the neighbor's driveway, ready to dig me out of the quicksand. And I'm grateful to him and for his example. I'm grateful to you for being here today to commemorate his life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. It's a privilege to be here at an event associated with the name of Rex Lee and J. Reuben Clark as well. People who I admire greatly. I think many of us, not sure all of us, but many of us have Rex Lee stories. He clearly touched a lot of lives in his time. It's particularly a pleasure for me to be here to present the Rex Lee Advocacy Award this year to Jeff Mineo, who currently serves as Administrative Assistant to Chief Justice John Roberts. He's an advocate and someone who I think who exemplifies the excellence in principled advocacy throughout his career. The kind of things that you can find on the internet are fairly easy and fairly impressive. He received his engineering degree from the University of Utah and then actually was in engineering for a couple of years before going to law school. He then attended law school at the University of Michigan and clerked for Judge Monroe McKay. For those of you who know Monroe, that's quite an experience in and of itself, and shapes out one's education in a remarkable way. Right after clerking with Judge McKay, he began work at the Department of Justice in the Environmental and Natural Resources Division, as it's known now, and then moved into the Solicitor General's office in 1985. He was there until 2006, at which point he was appointed by the Chief Justice to his current position. In that period of time, he argued 56 cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. It's another one of those math skills you can add it up beyond 5. Just to give you a comparison, that's sort of Rex Lee-like. I think Rex argued 59, if I remember in terms of the number. That's an impressive number. More importantly is his judgment, and this is a bit of an insider. Maybe only I will appreciate this. His first case was a case called the United States versus Dion. Those of you who know federal Indian law, there may be 1 or 2 of us here in the room, will recognize that case. And he had the wisdom, I'm sure, to sort of finagle this, so he could argue it. More importantly, it was a unanimous decision, as I recall. And that's not a bad way to start off a career at the Supreme Court. I think last year I shared with the same group that Rex's first oral argument was 9-0 as well, but he was the loser in that case. So you can sort of improve, you can go from either end and end up in the same place in these kinds of careers. I think in terms of advocacy, the kinds of cases, the kinds of skills that we would hold out as Rex Lee exemplifying, Jeff has represented as well. But there's another thing I think that as well represents part of the principal part of this advocacy. It's not only being an advocate and being successful, and you don't get 56 Supreme Court cases without being successful. There are high stakes involved, and those who are not good at it will be like me. I made my only appearance before the Supreme Court today to move the admission of some of our graduates and friends of the law school. That's what happens when you're not skilled at this. That's the kind of thing you can do as opposed to 56 is an impressive number. More importantly, as I thought about it, as I had a chance to visit with him a little, what really struck me is the sense we talked about with public service. This is a person who has been in public service from the beginning of his career. And that's increasingly rare. But something that Rex, we all have our Rex Lee stories, and one of them that I remember is Rex, Dee Benson told us at our Founders Day dinner the other time, Rex, as he was leaving the Solicitor General's position and looking at various options that he had available to him, which literally included anything he wanted to do, including being a federal judge. And he joked to Dee at the time, he says, I don't want to be a federal judge, he says, because I want to go to the grocery store and be able to buy Thomas's muffin rather than the generic brand that I can get at Giant. The point of that story really isn't, Rex's affinity for particular brands of muffin, but that there is a sacrifice involved when you're involved in public service. And that's increasingly true. A career in public service, particularly in the federal government, for those who are distinguished in it, really involves sacrifices. And I think it's important as we remember Rex to think about, and we honor others, to think about the kinds of sacrifices people make that are less noticeable in many ways. But having a career of 20 years of working at the highest stages of appellate advocacy is really a remarkable feat, and I think something which really says a lot about him. So it is a great privilege for me, both as an outstanding advocate, as an outstanding servant, to present the Rex Lee Advocacy Award to Jeffrey Menaker. Because it's kind of heavy and awkward, and we'll make sure that it gets delivered to him afterwards.
Almost afraid to touch it. Well, thank you. Thank you, Dean Worthing, for those very kind and generous remarks. It reminds me of Justice Brennan. Some of you may know that when he received the tribute, he often said that he wished his parents were there so his father would enjoy it and his mother would even believe it. Now, my mother grew up out west, and so she'd know better to believe all the good things that people have said about me, and she'd remind me instead that to thank the people that helped me to get wherever I was. And there's many of those people here in the room today, and I'd like to say a thank you to them. It's a great pleasure to be here, and a real honor to be in an event honoring Rex Lee. Rex is just a major figure in the law and in advocacy. And the best part of this gathering is it gives us the opportunity to talk about Rex and to remember him. And I was very touched by Mike's remembrance of Rex. I knew Rex more from a distance, but even from that distance, he was a very inspirational figure. The first time I encountered Rex Lee was in 1978 in the fall. I had a friend who was going to law school at the Y. I had graduated. I decided to work for a couple of years, but was planning to go to law school. And my friend invited me to come to the Y and see what law school was like. And he invited me to come to the constitutional law class that Rex Lee was teaching. What he didn't tell me about was the Socratic method. And Rex was a big believer in this. And ignorance of the law is generally no excuse, and that was the case in his classroom. And if ignorance could be made visible, I would have had a big bullseye written drawn on my chest as he asked these questions. And my first impression of Rex, I have to say, was somewhat of fear. But as I look back on it, I really have to say it's one of awe when I think of what he did with the J. Reuben Clark Law School. He was not only a great teacher, but he was a visionary for this law school and a promoter of the law school, and he was just a magnet for faculty talent. And I think that Judge Benson is truly correct in describing the J. Reuben Clark Law School as the house that Rex built. I didn't see Rex again until about 3 years later, and I can pinpoint the date in this case. It was February 22nd, 1982, and it was the day of the argument in the Chadha case. I was in Washington by chance doing a law firm interview at a free afternoon and decided to go over to the Supreme Court and get in the public line and watch an argument, and by chance it was Chadha. And there was Rex Lee, now instead of asking the questions, fielding them. And once again, it was a source of inspiration and awe. He had such comfort at the lectern. And I think the key to his advocacy, I always thought, was his ability to confront questions squarely and answer them. He never shied away from a question. And I recall very clearly at the end of the Chadha argument, he was asked a hypothetical, and his response was, well, let me make it more difficult. And then he added another condition to it, and then answered that hypothetical. He had thought that far along in terms of presenting his argument. It was truly a remarkable experience. Though he had to argue with Chadha twice, ultimately to win, and it just, I think, also showed his real strengths, which was perseverance. Now, I did not encounter Rex again for a couple of years. I went off to clerk with Monroe McKay. I found out that Judge McKay was a great friend of Rex's. And you could not imagine two more different people. And yet, they were close friends, which I think spoke very well of both Rex and Monroe. But I did encounter Rex next when I went to the Justice Department. And what I found there, I was working in the Environment Division doing primarily appellate work. And as most of you know, in order to take an appeal, you have to get the authorization of the Solicitor General. And in the case when an authorization came from Rex, it really was a sense that we have to win this case because Rex believes it can be won. And it was almost to be like letting a friend down. He was so well liked in the department. He was truly revered in the department in a way that I think that is difficult to understand unless you were there at the time. He had the questionable call of bringing me to the SG's office. He was the person who hired me in the SG's office. The only occasion I ever really had to question his judgment, but I attribute it to his boundless optimism that he had. And he left the SG's office shortly after I arrived. But from that vantage point, I got a chance to watch him in the private sector as he developed a practice at Sidley and Austin, and how he really reinvigorated the private Supreme Court bar almost single-handedly. He really became the major figure among Supreme Court advocates for the next decade. And on his way, he continued to teach at BYU and also became president of the university. I share all of these personal and somewhat coincidental encounters I had with Rex, just to make the point that I don't have the close association of his friends and family and know all those dimensions, but I can appreciate the strength of this incredible person. I count him as a friend, and I'm grateful for what he did in my life. But the image that sticks with me is just that of a luminous life, and how it can the light can spill over into unexpected corners, and I was in one of those corners. I'm very grateful to have had those glimpses of Rex, and I'm very grateful to receive this award. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and congratulations. Appreciate that. We are pleased to have with us today as well Thomas Kelly, who is going to give our final remarks. He's an Executive Vice President and Secretary of JetBlue Airways Corporation. He has also served in the past as their General Counsel. Previous to his service at JetBlue, he served as the Executive Vice President, General Counsel, and a member of the Board of Directors of Open Skies. Previous to that, he also served as an Executive Vice President and General Counsel of Morris Air Corporation. As I have had an opportunity to visit with him a little bit, I've also learned that he's a church leader, a stake president at the University of Utah, my alma mater, and that's exciting for him to be able to be there, and the father of 5 children and twin grandchildren. And we're very pleased to have him with us here today. Mr. Kelly.
Thank you very much. I must admit this is a humbling, almost intimidating group of speakers to follow. I'll certainly do my best, but I think we've all been very enriched by what we've heard so far. I am one who did not know Rex Lee extremely well, but the contacts I had with him were highly memorable. When I was a second-year student at Harvard Law School, Rex passed through town visiting some friends and invited law school students there who had been BYU undergraduates to go to a private home and have an evening with him. It was so impressive. We were in awe of him given his reputation. And a 1-hour meeting must have turned into a 3-hour meeting as he took questions, asked questions, and treated us as if we were his fellow senior partners. I think immediately from that first visit, I sensed this is a man who treats people well regardless of their status. I'm sure in his law office he knew the janitor's name, and it was nice to the receptionist as well as to the senior partners. You sensed his caring in that first encounter I had with him. As has been mentioned, I'm involved with JetBlue Airways. I have been since the beginning of that airline. In fact, I've been working with David Neeleman since 1984. He was 24 years old at the time. His uncle, Stan Neeleman, who some of you know is a professor of law at BYU, Stan introduced me to his nephew and said, keep your eye on David. He's an energetic guy, but he's just been hired to start a charter operation at Morris Travel. And so I did. I worked with him, and it proved to be very successful. And in 1993, Southwest Airlines came to town and purchased all the stock of the company. We were on the verge of doing an IPO, and I think they decided, boy, this is a good time to buy if we're going to buy. So they came into town, bought the company, and I moved on with David to the next project, which was starting an airline reservation company that proved successful and ended up being purchased by Hewlett-Packard in 1998. And at that time, David's non-compete with Southwest had expired, so he said, hey, let's do a business plan for a new airline. And I said, okay, I'll help you write that. He was the idea guy much more than me, like is often the case with lawyers, and I don't mean to disparage anyone in this room. To many respects, he was more the entrepreneur. I was more the rudder on the ship that helped steer him and the scrivener that put his ideas into words. But we had a lot of fun putting a business plan together and then hitting the road to visit private equity firms and succeeded in raising money for the company. At that point, we were calling it New Air, very creative name. Later, some marketing people came up with JetBlue, which I think it turned out better than New Air. But in any event, by 2000, we were up and running and doing business. And it was a fun project getting it running, and it's been great to work with David. When we started the company, we decided in lieu of a mission statement to designate 5 values to guide the company. We spent days talking about what those should be, and 2 of the values we came up with that epitomize Rex Lee and also my experience with David Neeleman and others at JetBlue were caring and integrity. Let me talk for a minute about the caring value. We've heard much already about Rex Lee's caring nature. Let me give you a couple of insights into David Neeleman's and what I hope has helped with the culture of JetBlue. When we first configured our aircraft, we put 26 rows in the plane. That gave us good legroom, a little better than most in the industry, but not great, on 25 rows. The 26th row was a problem. Mathematically, it didn't work out where you could have all 26 rows exactly the same, so the 26th row got a couple of inches less of legroom. Now, that may not seem like too much, but when you don't have any to spare, it was a bad row. I think nothing speaks more highly of David's caring value when it comes to the customers is whenever he flew on our airline, if the flight was full, he demanded that he be in those bad seats. He did not want passengers to have to sit in those seats. And he instructed the rest of us in the company to do the same. He said, our existence comes from our customers. We owe our professional life to them. If anyone's going to sit in the bad seats, it's going to be the ones receiving the money, not the ones paying the money. So employees sit in those back seats. David has a very tall wife. She's about 6 feet tall, and she used to sit with him. I think she's one of the reasons we eventually took out row 26 and went to 25 rows so that nobody, including David's wife, would have to sit in row 26 to show the great priority that should be given to customers, to care for them. Another quick experience, I happened to be in New York on 9/11. We were, in fact, if you can believe the timing, we were at the printers, we had completed our registration statement, and were, the morning of September 11th, 2001, going to hit the button and send it to the SEC to start our IPO. I was on my way to that very meeting when in my hotel room I heard the explosion and my windows rattled from the plane hitting the tower, and obviously turned to other things in the days ahead, and ended up getting involved with David, going out to the airport. 2 nights later, on September 13th, the FAA told us we might be able to fly. Probably not, but some of our customers were so desperate to go back that they congregated at the airport. I was out there with David, but it turned out we weren't able to fly that soon. So you had all these customers waiting to catch a cab. A few cabs were coming, a few taxis, but there was a long line. We were going to drive back to David's home in New Canaan, Connecticut, and he said, gee, we ought to give some people some rides. So he saw 3 guys, he had 3 seats in his car. He said, hey, where are you guys going? And they said, Midtown Manhattan. And he said, oh, close enough. If you know that area, that was a little bit of a sacrifice. David and I hadn't slept much for 2 nights, and he thought, oh, Midtown, New Canaan, good enough. So we piled these 3 guys in the car at 11 o'clock at night, drove to Manhattan, dropped them off, and it wasn't until, it was maybe a 40-minute ride. Right as they were being dropped off, they said, oh, by the way, what do you do at JetBlue? And David said, I'm the CEO, and kind of smiled and drove off, and you saw the surprised looks on their face. But it has been great to work at a company, and not that we haven't made mistakes, some highly publicized, but it's been great to work at a company where there's never been any doubt about how the CEO feels about customers. And it was great, I know, for many of you to be at a law school where there was never any doubt, or a university about the dean, or a university about the president, or to be the son of a father where there was never any doubt about the care that person had for other individuals, the basic worth of every human being. What a great value that is. I might mention one other thing. I don't want to turn this into a tribute for someone who's not here, and David, but one other thing he's done, some of you may know, he has a lot of stock in JetBlue because he founded the company. I mean, you know, we issued the initial stock when it was just a very small company. But other than that stock, since we went public, we've never had an option backdating problem because he has taken no options. He's turned them down every time the comp committee has offered them. And his entire salary he has given to a charitable fund we set up for crew members who have problems in their families. And there are many, many stories like him in the corporate world and the legal world. I think sometimes businesses and lawyers get criticized because of the actions of a few, the headlines of a small minority lead to a general perception of something that just isn't the case. My experience with the legal profession has been very positive. I'm proud to be an attorney. If I could turn the clock back, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. Not that there haven't been trials and challenges, but one thing I would do if I could turn the clock back is in those early years as an associate, I'd be more respectful and caring about my clients. Clients are to a law firm what customers are to an airline, what passengers are to an airline. And I think as a young attorney, I didn't fully appreciate that. Fresh out of law school, I thought legal cases were almost like academic experiments. These were fun. These were intellectually stimulating things you could discuss with fellow lawyers as long as the client didn't pester you with phone calls or didn't annoy you and get in the way of doing the real work of just brainstorming with your fellow attorneys. Over time, I think I've come to appreciate more that clients aren't a nuisance. Clients are the reason we exist as attorneys. And I think I've come to that partly because for many years now, I've been the client. I've been the general counsel calling law firms and seeking their services. And I can tell you, for those of you who provide that kind of service to general counsel, I am so grateful to have people that I have been able to call and people who've been responsive and knowledgeable, and when they weren't, to say, I don't know, but I'll find out, and who care about your company, who maintain their objectivity, but still care about you and what you're doing. It's once again, I have nothing but high marks for those attorneys with whom I've served, and I even don't have any complaints about their billing rates. It's hard to be upset about a billing rate of an attorney if you've done an IPO and seen what the investment bankers make. You're talking pocket change in terms of a $600 an hour billing rate compared to 7% of an IPO, but that's another story. And my apologies to any investment bankers in the room. But I saw a few nods. I think a few of you know the point I'm making. I'd like to mention, and just in closing, a story that I think has a lot to do with Rex Lee and integrity. Do you know that Rex Lee spoke 7 times at BYU when he was president to the students as they would collect? And something happened there that I think is rare on university campuses. They'd hold an assembly, a meeting to start the year, and more than 20,000 would show up to hear him speak in the Marriott Center there, the big basketball stadium. They loved him and loved hearing from him. And his final year, his health was such, he knew this would be his final September talk to kick off the academic year. And so he said in his opening remarks that he had really thought seriously about what subject could he address for this very special final talk. And he chose the topic of honesty and integrity. Not just because that meant so much to him, but because clearly he wanted that to be a departing message to those students he loved so much. He would not have given that talk if he did not fear that we're all vulnerable to ethical lapses. No matter how much we think we are an ethical person, we never know if we've been fully tested. And I think he wanted to reinforce that importance and give us a kind of a booster shot to our integrity in those final remarks. And it makes me think of a story I heard that just as a father really touched my heart. I read not long ago about, now this is another profession, but we bear much in common, about an accountant in a publicly traded company ordered by CFO to make improper, in fact that's a kind word, fraudulent entries in the financial statements. And this accountant, in retelling the story, said, deep down I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I rationalized. I rationalized that I needed to support my family and I couldn't lose my job. I rationalized I was protecting people around me. I rationalized that I would create such a stink if I refused that it just would cause other problems. So he rationalized his way into a prison sentence. And in writing this story, he pointed out the fact that one of the things he had in the prison cell to keep him company was a little red Clifford doll that his young son had given him, saying, Dad, I hope this helps you not be lonely in prison. This was a professional that by all accounts had been ethical up to that point, who didn't initiate the system. It wasn't his idea to engage in these misleading acts in a public company, but he didn't resist the pressure he received from on high. Once again, this doesn't happen often, this is an exception, but I tell the story as a cautionary tale, a reminder that who of us knows when we might be put in a position of exceptional pressure. And unfortunately, those situations don't come wrapped up like a law school exam. You don't come to work one day with a clear desk and be told, okay, here's your ethical question, work on it for a week. It usually comes when you have a closing and you're stressed and maybe you've been short on sleep and you've got a family activity and something happens in your office and you have to decide, am I going to do something that I know I shouldn't do, but it would really, really be hard not to do it. There's that old saying that rivers and individuals become crooked by following the path of least resistance. And boy, sometimes that's what you want to do when it's complicated and busy and just tough to take a stand. But I think if there's anything Rex Lee stood for and his final remarks stood for was taking a stand. In that